This module is going to explain a design process for creating brand names. And this is a somewhat abbreviated version of a note that's available off of my website, ktulrich.com. It won't come as any surprise to you that I'm going to argue for using our standard design process for the creation of an artifact, which is a brand name. And so we're going to proceed by defining a problem, exploring alternatives, and selecting a plan. I'm going to work with an example, which was the creation of the name for my bike seat. And I'm just going to mention a few issues you want to think about as you define the naming problem. First of all, is it just an artifact, that is, say, just a product that you're trying to name, or are you also trying to name an organization? If you're trying to name an organization, sometimes you want the name to be a little bit more flexible than that for just the product itself, because you may have other products or services in the future. The second issue is, do you need an internet domain name or really just a product name? In most cases, you do want the domain name, and that actually is what makes the naming problem quite challenging. Third, what are the attributes you're trying to evoke with your product name, with the brand name that you're trying to create? This usually relates to the marketing message or the positioning that you're trying to achieve in the market with the artifact. And then, as indicated in the introductory module, some of the other things you almost always care about is, does the name evoke the thing you're trying to name? Does it have positive associations? Is it easy to say? Is it memorable? Does it have unambiguous spelling? And are you able to legally and practically use the name? That is, does it avoid infringing on the trademarks of others, and is the domain available? So you can think of these issues as resolving the basic problem definition task, just as we did for any other artifact. The next step is exploration. I recommend using decomposition, which is a principle that works very well with names. The basic decomposition approach, just as we saw for artifacts more generally, is to first generate a list of chunks, and then to manipulate those chunks or combine those chunks in order to create integrated solutions. So some of the ways that you can decompose or that you can develop elements or chunks in response to the naming problem are to consider dictionary words that are related to the artifact. So in this case, saddle, seat, bike, ride, and so forth. Proper nouns and their derivatives, Swiss, Armstrong, Alpe d'Huez, etc. Other roots that often come from other languages, say Latin or Greek. So you might have leger, velo, stadio, corsa. And then affixes, which are other elements, other text elements that can be affixed or attached to the name. For instance, pro, neo, city, tech, max, or star. You then take this list of chunks, which you generate somewhat exhaustively as all the elements of text that could be related to your artifact, and you manipulate them. And actually, even before I talk about manipulation, let me say that in the case of generating those chunks, you really want to make sure that you engage some people who are very good with words. Not everyone is good with words. You probably have some friends who are really good with words. Make sure to get them involved in giving you some ideas for what those chunks ought to be. Then in terms of manipulating the chunks, well, some of them don't have to be manipulated at all. You can simply use them directly. So you could call your product the Ride, or the Flex, or the Bentley, or the Velo. The problem typically with using chunks directly is that the domain names are not usually available, and there are sometimes some trademark issues. You can also combine them. You can mutate them, that is, change them, manipulate them, and you can add affixes to either the beginning or the end of the word. I created a web-based tool called Lingzini in order to make it easier to generate those lists of chunks and to manipulate them. The Lingzini tool is very much a work in process, but I'll put a description of it at the end of this video in case any of you want to try it. So for instance, some examples here of possible names for our bike seat might be just simply using directly the chunks, could be the Ride, the Armstrong, or the Stadio, and some compound words which are simply the adding together of two actual dictionary words, might be soft ride or flex seat or VeloSoft or Pro Seat. You have a much greater chance of these being available in terms of trademark and domain name. And then there are synthetic names which don't exist in the dictionary or are not combinations of words that appear in the dictionary. Some examples of those might be Zeet or Flost or Rolo. All of these are constructed and thus likely to be available in terms of trademark and domain. And lastly, you can create compound synthetic names that are combinations of synthetic chunks. I've shown here in this last column some examples of names that exist out there in the world that are instances of each of these four categories of names. Once you've generated those names, then I recommend that you go and work with a spreadsheet, just as we did in concept selection, to apply some screening based on the elements of problem definition that you've established. I'm showing you here the actual spreadsheet that I used to evaluate the names that I had identified. And so I had identified, it looks like about 18 different names, and I evaluated them based on 5 attributes: their length, and I actually just counted the number of characters, and then I mapped that character length into a score from 0 to 3. And then I subjectively evaluated whether the name had positive associations for the brand, and then I evaluated whether I felt the spelling was unambiguous, and then whether it conveyed the right tone of seriousness and performance for the brand, and then how easy it is to say. These were all subjective judgments, except for the length score. They're all subjective judgments. And then this is simply a percent of a possible 15 total points, 3 for each of these 5 categories. I then rank ordered these names based on score, and I took the top 4, which were Nexride, Sofroll, and Zetaflex, and I put them on to the next level of concept testing, just as you would do, just as we've taught for other types of design. As a final step in the process, just as we did with concept testing, you are going to concept test your name. And the basic idea here is that you'll run an online survey, typically with 30 to 100 respondents from your target audience, users from your target audience, and you'll ask them to respond to various questions about 3 to 5 name alternatives that you've identified as being promising. I'm not going to go through the details of that survey, but the detailed instructions are available at this URL. This URL is also linked to my homepage, ktulrich.com. Lastly, let me say that the naming process can be quite frustrating, and one is often not sure that the final result is good enough. And so I would strongly recommend that if you've applied a good process and if you've applied substantial effort and you've identified a name, that you just go with it. And typically then, once you put some graphic identity around it and you live with it for a while, it looks right, and you can't imagine having called the artifact anything else. This is the Lingzini name generation tool. It's very much a proof of concept prototype, so be very careful to save your work if you use it. You're certainly welcome to use it, and it has some useful features. So, for instance, you can just create a list of names, and it will automatically test their availability as you type them in, which is pretty useful as a handy way to very quickly generate some names. It also has a list of common affixes. It has a built-in dictionary, and it has some other features. So it's a pretty useful way to generate some names. Incidentally, this project is kind of stalled. If any of you are amazing programmers and want to take on a project like this, please let me know, as I'd very much like to find someone who's interested in naming, but who also has great programming skills.